How the Allies turned the tide of World War II. World War II, 1939 to 1945, was the deadliest conflict in human history, involving nations across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. In the early years of the war, the Axis powers, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan, achieved rapid and dramatic successes. Much of Europe fell to Germany, Japan expanded across East and Southeast Asia, and the Allies appeared divided and unprepared. However, through a combination of strategic military victories, economic strength, technological innovation, global cooperation, and leadership, the Allied powers gradually reversed these early defeats and ultimately achieved victory. This turning of the tide was not the result of a single event, but a series of critical developments across multiple fronts. Early Axis dominance, 1939 to 1941. At the start of the war, the Axis powers seemed unstoppable. Germany used a new military tactic called blitzkrieg, lightning war, combining fast-moving tanks, aircraft, and infantry. Poland fell in weeks, followed by Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Italy joined Germany in 1940, expanding Axis influence in the Mediterranean and North Africa. Japan, already at war with China, aimed to dominate Asia and the Pacific. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet and brought the United States into the war. By 1941, the Axis controlled vast territories, and many believed Allied defeat was possible. The importance of Allied unity. One of the Allies' greatest strengths was cooperation. The Grand Alliance included the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, China, and many other nations. Despite ideological differences, especially between capitalist democracies and the Communist Soviet Union, the Allies coordinated military strategy and shared resources. Major leaders such as Franklin D. Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin worked together through conferences like Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam to plan the war effort. This unity allowed the Allies to fight a truly global war, forcing the Axis to defend multiple fronts simultaneously. Turning points in Europe. 1. The Battle of Britain, 1940. After France fell, Germany attempted to defeat Britain through massive air attacks. The Royal Air Force, RAF, successfully defended British skies against the German Luftwaffe. This was Germany's first major defeat and prevented an invasion of Britain. It kept a major Allied power in the war and provided a base for future operations in Europe. 2. Operation Barbarossa and the Battle of Stalingrad, 1941 to 1943, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 marked a critical mistake. Initially successful, German forces advanced deep into Soviet territory. At Stalingrad, Soviet troops surrounded and defeated an entire German army in early 1943. This was a devastating blow to German morale and manpower. Stalingrad is widely considered the turning point of the war in Europe, as Germany was forced into retreat. 3. D-Day and the liberation of Western Europe, 1944. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied France. Thousands of ships and aircraft supported landings on the beaches of Normandy. Allied forces established a foothold in Western Europe. France was liberated, and Allied armies pushed steadily toward Germany. Germany now faced enemies advancing from both the east and west. Turning points in the Pacific. 1. The Battle of Midway, 1942. After early victories, Japan suffered a critical defeat at Midway Island. The U.S. Navy sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. Japan lost experienced pilots and naval strength it could not replace. The strategic balance in the Pacific shifted in favor of the Allies. Midway is considered the turning point of the Pacific War. 2. Island hopping strategy. The Allies adopted a strategy of island hopping. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held island, the U.S. targeted key locations. This cut off Japanese supply lines and brought Allied forces closer to Japan. Major battles included Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. This strategy steadily weakened Japan's ability to resist. Economic and industrial power. The Allies, especially the United States, had overwhelming economic strength. U.S. factories produced enormous quantities of tanks, aircraft, ships, and weapons. The Lend-Lease program supplied Britain, the Soviet Union, and other allies with vital equipment. Allied production far exceeded that of the Axis, allowing losses to be replaced quickly. This industrial advantage made long-term victory possible. Technology, intelligence, and innovation. Several technological and intelligence advances helped the Allies. Code breaking, especially the cracking of Germany's Enigma codes, allowed the Allies to anticipate enemy plans. Radar improved air defense and naval warfare. Improved aircraft, tanks, and submarines gave the Allies a growing edge. The development of the atomic bomb ultimately led to Japan's surrender in 1945. The final defeat of the Axis Germany surrendered in May 1945 after Allied forces captured Berlin and Adolf Hitler committed suicide. Japan surrendered in August 1945 following atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Soviet invasion of Japanese-held territory. World War II officially ended, reshaping the global political order. Conclusion. The Allies turned the tide of World War II through determination, cooperation, and strategic adaptation. Early defeats forced them to learn, innovate, and mobilize their full economic and military potential. Key battles such as Britain, Stalingrad, Midway, and Normandy marked the shift from Axis dominance to Allied victory. Ultimately, Allied unity, industrial strength, leadership, and resilience overcame the Axis powers, ending one of the darkest chapters in human history and laying the foundation for the modern world. The role of leadership and morale. Strong leadership played a crucial role in helping the Allies turn the tide of World War II. Winston Churchill inspired Britain to resist Nazi Germany during its darkest hours, especially after the fall of France. Franklin D. Roosevelt mobilized the American economy and military, turning the United States into the arsenal of democracy. Joseph Stalin, despite early mistakes, oversaw the massive Soviet war effort that ultimately crushed German forces on the Eastern Front. Equally important was civilian morale. In Allied countries, citizens endured bombing raids, food rationing, and long working hours. Propaganda, national unity, and belief in eventual victory helped maintain public support for the war effort. The contribution of resistance movements across occupied Europe and Asia. Resistance movements weakened Axis control. In countries such as France, Poland, Yugoslavia, Greece, and China, resistance fighters sabotaged railways, destroyed supply depots, and gathered intelligence for the Allies. These groups disrupted Axis communications and forced Germany and Japan to divert troops away from the front lines. Resistance movements also kept alive the hope of liberation among occupied populations. Their efforts, though often dangerous and costly, played a vital supporting role in Allied success. The war at sea and control of supply lines, naval warfare, was another key factor in the Allied turnaround. In the Battle of the Atlantic, German U-boats attempted to cut off Britain's supply lines. Improved convoy systems, sonar technology, long-range aircraft, and code breaking allowed the Allies to defeat the U-boat threat. Control of the seas ensured that troops, weapons, food, and fuel could be transported safely across oceans. Without secure supply lines, major Allied offensives such as D-Day would not have been possible. The collapse of Axis resources. As the war continued, the Axis powers faced growing shortages. Germany lacked sufficient oil, raw materials, and manpower. Allied bombing campaigns destroyed factories, railways, and cities, weakening Axis production. Japan suffered from naval blockades that cut off vital resources such as oil and food. In contrast, the Allies could replace losses far more quickly, widening the gap in strength as the war progressed. The human cost of turning the tide. The Allied victory came at an enormous human cost. Tens of millions of soldiers and civilians were killed. The Holocaust carried out by Nazi Germany resulted in the murder of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims. Cities across Europe and Asia were left in ruins, and millions were displaced from their homes. Understanding how the Allies turned the tide also means recognizing the immense sacrifices made by soldiers and civilians alike. Aftermath and long-term impact. The Allied victory reshaped the world. The United Nations was created to promote peace and prevent future global conflicts. Europe was divided during the Cold War, with tensions between former allies. Many colonies in Asia and Africa began movements toward independence. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers. The lessons of World War II continue to influence global politics, military strategy, and international cooperation today. Scientific advances gave the Allies a major advantage as the war progressed. Radar technology helped detect enemy aircraft and ships early, playing a vital role in air and naval defense. Advances in medicine, such as penicillin, saved countless wounded soldiers and returned them to combat more quickly. The Allies developed better tanks, aircraft, and artillery as the war continued, while Axis designs struggled to keep up. These innovations allowed the Allies to fight more efficiently and reduce losses over time. Strategic bombing and air superiority control of the air was another key reason the Allies turned the tide. Allied bombers targeted German and Japanese factories, oil refineries, railways, and cities. The Soviet Union's decisive contribution. The Soviet Union played the largest role in defeating Nazi Germany on land. The Eastern Front saw the largest and bloodiest battles of the war. Soviet victories at Stalingrad, Kursk, and during the advance toward Berlin destroyed much of the German army. The Red Army absorbed enormous losses but continued to push westward. By 1945, Soviet forces were closing in on Berlin, sealing Germany's defeat. The United States as the arsenal of democracy. The entry of the United States transformed the balance of power. American factories produced more weapons than all Axis countries combined. The U.S. trained and transported millions of soldiers across the world. Financial aid and supplies strengthened Allied armies on every front. This unmatched industrial power ensured the Allies could fight a long war and win it. Victory through global cooperation. The Allies succeeded because the war was fought on a truly global scale. Britain fought in Europe, Africa, and Asia. The Soviet Union bore the main burden in Eastern Europe. The United States led major operations in Western Europe and the Pacific. Commonwealth nations and other allies contributed troops, resources, and support. This cooperation overwhelmed the Axis powers, who could not match the combined strength of the Allies. Closing reflection. The Allies turned the tide of World War II through resilience, innovation, and unity. Early setbacks did not lead to defeat. Instead, they forced the Allies to adapt and grow stronger. Step by step, through major battles, economic strength, technological progress, and international cooperation, the Allies moved from survival to victory. The role of women in home front support. The war could not have been won without the efforts of civilians, especially women, on the home front. Women worked in factories producing weapons, aircraft, and ammunition, while men fought on the front lines. They served as nurses, code breakers, drivers, and support staff in the armed forces. Women also played key roles in resistance movements and intelligence operations. Civilian populations supported the war through rationing, war bonds, and long working hours, ensuring that armies were fully supplied. Intelligence, espionage, and deception. Allied intelligence operations greatly weakened the Axis powers. Allied spies gathered vital information about enemy troop movements and plans. Deception operations, such as misleading Germany about the location of the D-Day invasion, kept Axis forces off balance. Accurate intelligence allowed the Allies to strike at the right time and place. These hidden efforts saved countless lives and shortened the war. Axis strategic mistakes. The Allies also benefited from major mistakes made by Axis leaders. Hitler opened a two-front war by attacking the Soviet Union while still fighting Britain. Axis leaders underestimated the industrial strength of the United States. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor brought the U.S. into the war, greatly strengthening the Allies. Poor coordination among Axis nations further weakened their ability to respond effectively. The moral and ideological struggle. World War II was not only a military conflict, but also a struggle of ideas. The Allies fought to defend freedom, democracy, and human rights. Nazi racism, fascism, and militarism alienated occupied populations and strengthened resistance movements. Allied propaganda emphasized liberation rather than conquest. This moral dimension helped maintain unity and determination among Allied nations. The path to final victory. By 1944 to 1945, The outcome of the war was becoming clear. Allied forces advanced steadily in Europe and the Pacific. Germany collapsed under pressure from east and west. Japan faced overwhelming military force and economic isolation. The Allies' ability to sustain long-term warfare ultimately crushed Axis resistance. Overall conclusion: the Allies turned the tide of World War II through a combination of military success, economic power, technological innovation, intelligence, and global cooperation. While the Axis powers achieved early victories, they could not match the long-term strength and unity of the Allied nations. The war stands as a powerful reminder that perseverance, cooperation, and shared purpose can overcome even the greatest challenges. Lessons learned from the Allied victory. The way the Allies turned the tide of World War II offered important lessons for future generations. Preparation and adaptability proved essential. Early Axis victories showed the danger of being unprepared, while Allied success demonstrated the value of learning from mistakes. International cooperation became a key lesson. No single nation could have defeated the Axis alone. Economic strength and planning were just as important as battlefield courage. Technology and intelligence emerged as decisive factors in modern warfare. These lessons shaped military strategies and global politics long after the war ended. The impact on ordinary soldiers. Turning the tide of the war depended heavily on the courage of ordinary soldiers. Soldiers endured harsh climates, long separations from family, and constant danger. Many fought in unfamiliar lands, from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of the Pacific. Despite fear and exhaustion, Allied soldiers continued fighting, believing in the cause of freedom. Their sacrifice was a foundation of Allied success. The role of smaller Allied nations. While major powers led the war effort, smaller nations also made vital contributions. Countries such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, and Free France provided troops, resources, and leadership. Colonial soldiers from Asia and Africa fought bravely on multiple fronts. Their contributions strengthened Allied forces and broadened the global fight against the Axis. This showed that World War II was truly a worldwide conflict, rebuilding the world after victory. Turning the tide was only the beginning. The post-war world required rebuilding. Europe and Asia faced destroyed cities, broken economies, and displaced populations. The Marshall Plan helped rebuild Western Europe and prevent economic collapse. War crimes trials, such as the Nuremberg trials, sought justice and accountability. The Allies aimed not only to win the war, but to build a more stable peace. Why the Allied victory still matters today. The Allied victory shaped the modern world. It limited the spread of fascism and militarism. It strengthened international cooperation through global institutions. It influenced movements for independence and civil rights worldwide. Understanding how the Allies turned the tide helps us appreciate the value of unity, resilience, and shared responsibility. Final reflection. World War II was a test of humanity itself. The Allies' ability to turn defeat into victory showed that courage, cooperation, and determination can overcome even the darkest threats. The story of how the tide turned is not just history, it is a lesson for the future. A timeline of key turning points. Understanding when the tide turned helps clarify how the Allies won. 1939 to 1941, Axis expansion dominates Europe and Asia. 1940, Battle of Britain halts German expansion in Western Europe. 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. 1942, Battle of Midway shifts balance in the Pacific. 1942 to 1943. Battle of Stalingrad marks major German defeat. 1943. Axis forces surrender in North Africa. 1944. D-Day invasion opens Western Front. 1945. Germany and Japan surrender. War ends. Each of these moments weakened Axis power and strengthened Allied momentum. Key terms and concepts explained. To better understand how the Allies turned the tide, it is important to know some key terms. Allies, nations fighting against the Axis powers, including the US, UK, and Soviet Union Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Blitzkrieg, fast-moving German warfare tactic using tanks and aircraft. Lend-Lease, U.S. program supplying Allied nations with weapons and materials. Island hopping, Allied strategy of capturing key Pacific islands. Air superiority, control of the skies, allowing safe ground operations. These concepts shaped Allied strategy and success. Historical debate. Was victory inevitable? Historians still debate whether Allied victory was guaranteed. Some argue Allied industrial power made victory inevitable. Others believe early decisions, like Hitler attacking the Soviet Union, were decisive mistakes. Many agree that victory was not certain in 1940 to 1942 and depended on key battles and leadership. This debate shows how close the war's outcome once was, how the tide turned psychologically beyond weapons and strategy. Psychology mattered. Early Allied defeats caused fear and doubt. Major victories restored confidence and belief. Axis defeats damaged morale and reduced public support for the war. Winning the mental battle was as important as winning on the battlefield. Why this topic is still studied. The question of how the Allies turned the tide remains important because it explains how global cooperation works in crisis. It shows how mistakes can change history. It teaches the dangers of dictatorship and unchecked aggression. World War II remains a warning and a lesson for future generations. Another way to understand how the Allies turned the tide is by comparing the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. Allied strengths, strong industrial production, especially in the United States' ability to replace losses in soldiers and equipment, greater naval power and control of sea routes, growing air superiority, willingness to cooperate and share resources. Axis weaknesses, limited access to oil, raw materials, and food. Poor coordination between Germany, Italy, and Japan, overextension due to fighting on multiple fronts, leadership decisions based on ideology rather than strategy over time. These differences became more significant and favored the Allies.